Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Jean-Philippe. I'm a software engineer here at Grafana in the alerting team.
Hello, I'm Alex. I'm also an engineer here working on alerting at Grafana Labs. And today, we're going to talk about the evolution of Grafana alerting.
I have a gift for you.
Oh, thank you. Perfect. So I'm going to start with a show of hands. We have more than one alerting implementation at Grafana. So who here uses Grafana alerting? OK, that's like half the room-ish. Nice. Who uses Mimir or Loki alerting? OK, a few, a smaller number. Who doesn't know the difference between the two? A good number of people. That's a problem that I think we'd like to solve during this talk. But let's talk about why those are different first. So we need to start with the timeline. So way back in 2016, which is Grafana 4.0, which is a whole lot of versions ago, panel alerts was introduced into Grafana. And this is kind of like the inception of alerting in the Grafana project. So the idea is pretty simple. Like, people watch panels, but you can't stare at it all the time. You have to get up from your computer or go sleep, right? So you want Grafana to tell you when something interesting happens on your panel. As far as I could tell, this was the first commit of alerting in Grafana. It was by Carl Bergquist, who I'm sure you've seen walking around this conference plenty of times. But it's very driven by dashboards. Alert rules are embedded in dashboards, and it's just kind of conceptually an add-on to dashboards, right? It's not its own thing. So this feature really, really exploded in popularity over time, I think much more than the creators ever intended. The community really wanted to kind of push it to its limits. So in particular, in production, people want to run rules in this sort of high availability mode that Grafana has. So the idea is you just run more than one Grafana and you load balance between them. So if one goes down, the others can pick up your work and you can see your dashboards, right? But this is a really hard problem for alerting because, well, notifications, right? So the rules are straightforward. You can just replicate them among all the instances, but you don't want to get 3 times the Slack messages. It's kind of odd. So 4.2, really soon after in 2017, there was a feature added to deduplicate notifications in HA mode. This is kind of the first step to solving this problem. And it was fairly straightforward implementation. It just uses transactions on the SQL database that's part of Grafana. So they all attempt to basically write a record that they're sending a notification to the database, and the first one that writes the record is the one to send it. So if you have 3 Grafanas, you still only get 1 notification. If one drops out, you still get notifications from the other 2. They pick up the work, right? So this works really well, but kind of up to a point. You can see here are some issues from the time, and we have hundreds of interactions there, right? So there were some really highly requested feature gaps. So the big one is this problem that we now call multidimensional alerting, which is kind of I want to have a rule that works across multiple different streams of data. So one rule for all of my pods or something like that, right? But these were effectively asking for that, but they used very dashboard-specific language because at the time, alerting was driven by dashboards, right? There were some other sort of quality of life features, such as notification grouping and smarter, multi-channel routing, silencing of notifications. These kind of things were really, really hard to implement, especially in that high availability model that I just showed you. But around the same time, there's kind of another player in this space, Prometheus. And Prometheus is developing its own alerting model around at the same time. And as part of that, it created a notification service, basically, called the Prometheus Alert Manager. And this seems to handle basically all of the problems that we just talked about. It has this label semantic that it gets from Prometheus that handles the dimensionality problem, right? And then all of this other stuff like routing and silencing, you get almost for free. So in Grafana 5.0, 1 release later, we added support for an external Prometheus Alert Manager. You have to basically run it yourself. It's a separate binary. But Grafanas now send to alert managers rather than sending the notification themselves. And then the alert managers have this gossip protocol that they use among each other, and they kind of figure out which one of them is going to send the notification. When they have consensus, it will send like the one Slack message. The trade-off is that you have to run two binaries. So you have completely different configuration formats for these two, different UIs. It's kind of a pain to run. And you have like two, if you make a change to one, you have to make a change to the other, deploy it at the same time. It's not ideal. Pretty quickly after, we noticed that Alert Manager adoption has been kind of insane. It's been on a really, really steady year-over-year growth path ever since it was released. The community seems to demand it kind of more and more often. And around the same time, you see the same years, like 2016 to 2020, there are other projects that you've heard of, like Mimir, Loki. There are some open source projects as well, like Thanos, that were adopting the Prometheus model, and with that came Alert Manager. So there's kind of like this mass community standardization that we're seeing for this project. And the natural step was kind of to make it the default in Grafana. So Alert Manager is pretty great, but running your own is not fun. So the idea was, can Grafana run it for you? And can we just kind of unify the configuration experience between the two? Well, we decided to implement this. We called it Unified Alerting, and it was first released as a beta mode in Grafana 8. So JP will tell you more about Unified Alerting.
Yeah. So with Grafana 8, that's roughly the time where I joined Grafana, we started to release a new alerting system called Unified Alerting. And in 2021, it was in beta in October, and it was behind a feature flag. So we had to opt in to use it, and it was not enabled by default. It was a complete rewrite of the existing alerting system with the embedded alert manager for the first time. So the goal of this was to have a unified alerting UI for all your alert managers that you might have. So you could configure the alert managers in the same UI, the Grafana one, but also external ones. For example, if you have Grafana Cloud, you have a cloud alert manager, you can also configure it through the same UI than you would configure the embedded Grafana one. Or if you have perhaps something external already in Thanos or something like this, you could add it to Grafana and then also edit it there. So looking at the timeline, we can see that 1 year afterwards, in 2022, we released Grafana 9.0, and their unified alerting was enabled by default. So all users using Grafana 9.0, starting from there, would use the unified alerting experience. And we did a lot of work between version 8 and 9 to kind of align with the user expectations that we will have from legacy alerting. And now, finally, in Grafana 11, after roughly 3 years, we were able to completely remove legacy alerting. And Grafana now ships only with the unified alerting experience. So looking at the final timeline, we can see that it took roughly 3 years to go from a first beta to completely removing it and bringing this new solution as the default. So now let's walk a bit through a few notable changes that we have in Grafana 11. I'm really excited about a few here. The first one is the notification template previews. So perhaps you already have worked with notification templates. It's basically how the message looks like in your receivers, which can be, for example, Slack or Microsoft Teams. And now you're able to basically preview this message and not have to wait first for an alert to fire to basically see how it looks like. So on the left side, you now have the template, which is like a Golang template, where you can define how it should look like, the notification. And on the right side, you can basically select from past alert instances and template then a preview that will be then templated in the mail. Or you can even, if you don't want to select a past one, use the editor on the right side and kind of create your own payload. And then this is the feature I'm the most excited about. It's simplified routing of alerts. So previously, when you had an alert rule, you would first have to create a notification policy that kind of routes your alert through the alert manager and then to a contact point. In the legacy alerting system, you could directly map an alert rule to a contact point, which was pretty convenient if you were like just testing something, or perhaps a smaller team that doesn't need like a huge routing tree. So what we did is we just remove it, and now you can directly map an alert rule to a contact point if you like to, and if you don't need the notification policies. And the best thing about it is it has the same semantics as a notification policy. So you have a one-to-one mapping between your alert rule and a contact point, and you can still decide how the grouping works, if you have mute timings, or if you need different intervals, for example, group wait, group interval, or repeat interval. Another thing we did is redesigning completely the contact point overview. Before it was just a simple list, and now at a glance we can directly see, for example, for the email integration, which emails are part of this contact point. We can see when it was delivered for the last time, and how long the delivery took from the Grafana system to the third-party system. Another thing we did is the redesign of the alert rule overview. So this looks really cool. We can now directly see that we have on top a tab navigation where you can either see the query that the alerting rule consists of, or you can select to see the firing instances, look into the alert history, or look for a detailed view of the alert rule. So here you can see you have directly the query that runs the alert, and below it, we directly graph the series that this query did return. We also directly show the computational steps of the alert rule. So for example, there you can see the reduce step, and the reduce step for all the series that are assigned to this alert rule by the query that's provided. So now let's talk a bit what's next for alerting. So Alex, give us a sneak peek.
Yeah, so with unified alerting, we kind of have a similar-ish UI for the Mimir and Loki alerts versus the Grafana alerts, but they're still like really different systems on the back end. They both use Alert Manager, but they use it in different ways, like the way that you configure them is a bit different. Rule evaluation, however, is wildly different between the two still. So it's still very much two separate systems with a similar kind of user interface. This means that if you're a user, you kind of still have to pick the right one for your use case, right? There's a lot of similarities between them, but you have to kind of be an expert in both to pick the right tool for the job and understand enough about both tools. This is hopefully a choice that we want to remove going forward. So the first one is that a big drawback of Grafana alerting is its scaling properties. So you can only run however many rules actually fit in one Grafana instance, so you can only kind of vertically scale it. Even in high availability mode, all of the rules run on all of the instances. So once you run out of resources, you're kind of out of space for rules. The alerting implementations that Mimir and Loki offer, however, totally solve this problem. We're going to solve it in Grafana alerting right now. So we're bringing Mimir's multi-tenancy and scalability model to Grafana alerting. So the result of this is that the scaling properties of the tool shouldn't be a deciding factor as to which tool you need, and you should be able to run any number of alerts at any scale on any system with basically infinite scalability. So here's how we're doing this. So starting with Grafana Cloud, we have built this system that extracts Grafana alerting out of Grafana. And so if you're familiar with the architecture of the database projects like Mimir and Loki, it shouldn't come as much of a surprise. We take all of the rules from multiple different Grafana pods and we combine them into a big pool. And then these are distributed across a bunch of different rules engines that can then be horizontally scaled. So if you need to fit more rules, you add another rules engine, and they'll automatically redistribute the rules amongst each other so that you can kind of horizontally scale alerting as far as you want to push it. We have already built this system. It is currently stabilizing, and we are testing it in Grafana Cloud right now. Production rollouts will be proceeding to 100% in the next few months. That is happening in 2024. However, I mentioned Grafana Cloud a lot, so we want to gather some community feedback on this project. It's a really exciting project, I think, and we want to understand if the OSS community is interested in this, and if this is something that you think that it's a problem that you would solve. So we're actively wanting feedback on this. we will be at the Ask the Expert bar immediately following this talk, and we want to kind of chat about this and hear your use case and understand if there's enough community interest in this project and potentially making it open source. Similarly, if you don't chat with us at the conference, we have a Slack channel in the Grafana community Slack called Alerting. That QR code leads you there. We have more to share, so I'm going to move on. If you haven't scanned this yet, it'll be back at the end of the slides, don't worry. So the next one is that we want to introduce a centralized API to cover all use cases and all clients that is based on the Grafana app platform. So this is kind of leveraging a lot of the same tooling that you've heard about in a lot of the previous talks, but this is largely in kind of prototype phase. So here's an example of what it might look like. But we want to give everyone just kind of one single, one stabilized, versioned API that you can use to interact with your alert rules no matter what system you're using and no matter what your client is. So we want to remove the confusion over which API you use for which use case, which model you use for file provisioning versus API usage. We want to have a single kind of ergonomic pattern and an ergonomic model that's shared by everything, the UI, provisioning tools like Terraform, and then third-party clients that you might want to write. So those are kind of the big problems that we're tackling in the next 6 months to a year. But I want to hand it over back to JP to talk about kind of our 2-year horizon. What's the vision for Grafana alerting going forward?
Yeah. So going forward, very interesting. The first thing we need to do is to bridge the feature gaps between both alerting worlds that we have at Grafana. So one side is what I call the database alerting, which is how Mimi alerting and Loki alerting works. And the other side is the Grafana alerting, which as of today are quite different in some ways. So one of the differentiations is that the integrations, which are basically the third-party systems that the alert manager talks to, the configurations are quite different. They do the same thing, so for example, send a message to Slack, but how you configure it might be different and the fields are called in different ways. So we want to align on a superset of this to basically cater for both worlds. Another thing is evaluation. So if you use Loki or the Mimir ruler, you might know that there you have sequential evaluation of rule groups. This is something we don't have in Grafana alerting right now, and we are working on introducing it soon. Another thing that's really exciting is that we try to and want to implement Grafana managed recording rules. This will be the same as Prometheus recording rules, but it will work with any data source and will write back to a time series. So if you have a data source that is, for example, built by Query, you could create a recording rule to save some money and reuse the recording rule in your dashboards and your alerts. Another thing we need to do is compatibility. So the rule configuration format of Prometheus, which Loki and Mimir uses, and the Grafana managed rules are quite different. So what we want to create is a superset of this so we can cater for both worlds. Another thing is we need the tooling to migrate from the Prometheus and from the Loki systems to the Grafana managed system. So that's something we want to do in the near future. So if you look at the unification of the alert managers, how this could look like. So today, if you run an LGTM stack or you have Grafana Cloud, you may know that you have 2 alert managers. You have the Grafana alert manager and you have the Mimir one. And both work in the same way, but the configuration of the receivers is quite different. And so that's the first step we want to do, is to create a new binary that can run both configurations, the Grafana and the Mimir one, and then in the next step, create the superset configuration that's compatible with both, and you only need one alert manager. This would then look like this. So you would, in your alert manager selection, only have one alert manager left. The one externals, you could exclude them because you wouldn't need them. You could cater with one alert manager for all your use cases. And let's take a bit of a look at the unification of the rulers. So if you have an LGTM stack, you have 3 components that you need to run for alerting right now beside the alert manager. It's the Grafana ruler, the Mimir ruler, and the Loki ruler. And they all 3 basically do the same thing. They run alert rules on a schedule and then kind of send the results somewhere if it's firing. So the thing we want to do there is a bit the same thing, It's unifying both in one binary, that you have a binary that works with Grafana, with Mimir, and with Loki type of alert rules. But then we want to do a big step. We want to create a new alert rule format that's compatible with Prometheus and is basically a superset. So we only have one rule definition for all 3 systems. So if we now take a look at how this could look like on an abstract timeline, is on top we have database alerting with Mimir and Loki, with the Mimir Alert Manager, the Mimir Ruler, and the Loki Ruler. And on the bottom we have Grafana alerting with the Grafana Ruler and the Grafana Alert Manager. And our goal is to continue working on unified alerting and unifying both worlds into one experience for the users and the customers. So again, thanks for participating.